One is a classic compilation of cutesy cartoons. The other is a comfortable continuation. Winnie the Pooh. They remade it.
Hi, and welcome back to They Remade It. I'm your host of Very Little Brain, Stuart.
And I am JACOOB. That spells Jacob, I think.
Don't think too much into it.
And this week, as the title suggests, we're covering Disney's Winnie the Pooh.
Hooray!
And the many adventures of Winnie the Pooh. They're both Winnie the Pooh when you get right down to it.
Yeah, like we can call it the many adventures all we want, but everyone's gonna call it by Winnie the Pooh.
I'll call Pooh's Big Day, The Blustery Adventure, Tigger Movie. I don't really care.
Yeah,
Call it whatever I want.
Tigger movie was a different one entirely.
Yeah. We're not talking about that one.
Which technically, I guess we could lump that in with this one, but it's more a sequel to like the '90s show or something.
Do you want to do all of the Pooh movies? You want to do Piglet's Big Movie? You want to do the Heffalump movie?
Do we want to do the one like the 3 shorts from USSR Russia?
No, preferably not.
All right.
I try to stay away from Soviet cartoons.
Those dirty Soviets taking all our Winnies.
Russia's favorite cat and mouse duo, Worker and Parasite. So continuing. What?
Both Bolshevik and Tsarist.
Yeah. So piggybacking off of that, because I know that you've been looking into some Soviet cartoons lately. What have you been watching recently?
I've been watching a couple. I've seen like a couple random things I would just find online that I just decided, screw it, I'll just watch it. I ended up renting Rampage, that Dwayne Johnson movie that came out not too long ago, based off the arcade game.
Yeah. My dad rented that. I didn't watch it though.
Like, you'd think from like the previews and everything, and just from the idea of it, it would be pretty fucking stupid. I watched it. It was actually kind of awesome. Like, it's totally knew what it was, but it's like, it's a ridiculous monster movie and that sort of thing. But it does not let up for it. It takes out all the stops for it. Like, this is probably one of the most violent movies I've seen. Like, the first scene of it takes place on like this space station research lab, and it shows like this test rat that's gotten like injected with this like super like animal creature mutation thing, and like it's gone rogue and it's been eating all the people on the ship. And so you see like dismembered body parts and like corpses with their eyes chewed out and everything. And this is like a PG-13 movie, and it's gory as hell.
It's so...
like like, it's obviously not like over the top gory to need a R rating, but still, it's like it goes through all of that. It doesn't hold back on like, civilians getting killed, like giant destruction moments, like super crazy moments, and over the top lines that are just kind of awesome. And also the effects are actually really, really good, like with the destruction. So I had a blast watching it. I really did not expect it.
All right, maybe I'll look into it. I have one thing though. You mentioned the rat.
Yeah.
So I guess it's animals that get experimented on and then turn into these beasts and not humans.
Yeah, it does omit that. It's just
okay. That's already a -1 point for me.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's not like like the scum soda thing from the original one where like they drank it and then like humans drank it and then they became animal creatures. No, it's specifically animal creatures that get like a bunch of random mutations. Like, it's a plot point in it. It's like each mutagen mutates each animal a little differently.
Right.
And so it's like, there's just one of them is just like a really big gorilla, but another one's a crocodile that has like huge horns and everything. It's like crazy.
Yeah, which is sort of that's sort of stock, I guess, for a movie plot, like just normal mutated animals. But it's a lot easier for an audience to grasp onto that than humans drinking soda that mutates them into giant animals. Like, I don't feel like people would be too keen to go see that movie, even if they were familiar with the game.
Yeah, and with this one, it kind of just perfectly straddled the line to being too ridiculous that it wouldn't even be fun. Like, in this one, it did have like the slight like not believability but grounding that kind of made it all like the action feel a bit cooler rather than just being ridiculous shit that just made it seem like Mars Attacks.
Right. Well, I like
Yeah,
Mars Attacks. It depends, I guess.
yeah, that's fair. But yeah, that's the main one I watched. I've seen like clips of movies and stuff. Like I basically essentially watched all of Infinity War finally just through clips online alone. I was like, all right, that's good enough. I've already gotten all the spoilers already, so screw it.
You went onto the movie clips YouTube page and just watched all 8 that they had for that movie.
There was a few clips channels that I flipped between. I was like, all right, this one has some, this one has some, good enough.
I've seen the whole movie. I get it now.
Yeah, I get the gist of it. I can just read the wiki plot for the details.
All right.
But yeah, that's pretty much been my experience. And then, well, actually, I also saw Christopher Robin, which relates back to this, but I'll talk about that more later.
Right. We'll do. I also saw Christopher Robin, so we'll do a really brief discussion of it right before the synopses start. But I'm gonna go through the other things that I saw as well before we do that.
Yeah, I'd love to see what you've seen, whatever crazy thing it's this time.
And I actually have seen quite a few things, so I'm gonna keep discussions brief on it, or else we'll be here forever.
That's fair.
Okay, so I marathoned the entire series of Neuro Supernatural Detective, which is an anime. It's only about 25 or 26 episodes. I actually really enjoyed it. The way they handled it, it's one of those shows that has a story that's sort of in the background, and near the end of the series, they go into it to try and tie up all the loose ends.
Mm-hmm.
But the main premise of the show is a demon likes to eat mysteries, and he ate all the mysteries in hell, so he comes to Earth to eat more. And he starts up. Hold on. He starts up a detective agency using this high school girl as like the lead detective, sort of as a front,
because
of course, but he sort of uses that as a front so that he can get away with doing this without alerting everyone that he's a demon. But they frame it really well because it is sort of it's sort of a case of the week type of show, where you don't really know that there's a story in the background that they're leading up to, because it's very episodic. It's like, oh, well, there's a mystery here that needs to be solved, and you see the process of it. It's like a detective show, and it was
like the first 2 seasons of Steven Universe,
right?
Before it just got a little bit too into its own background story,
right? Sort of, yeah. But since it was never sort of framed in that light, it didn't feel like filler. It felt like, well, this is the show, is them going around solving mysteries. It's like NCIS, but I enjoy it. I got caught up on the new DuckTales. I won't go too much into that. 1, for spoiler reasons, and 2, because I've talked about the reboot on this show before, I believe.
Fair enough. Very briefly. Fair enough.
Yeah, but I got caught up on that. I watched Dirty Work, comedy from 1998 with Norm Macdonald and Artie Lang.
Fun.
You would think. Not,
all right, well.
Not too terribly funny. I like Norm Macdonald as a comedian, but him as a leading man doesn't make much sense to me, because he is such a, I don't know if you've ever seen him do stand-up or seen him in interviews, but his comedy is just the very dry, I'm sort of speaking now, you expect me to say one thing and I'm saying another thing, get it? And when he does it, it's funny, but it doesn't really work in the movie.
You can't really carry a movie with that kind of bit. Like, I like dry humor, but only for stand-up. When you do it in a movie, it's like, this is just, well, it's dry.
Right. Like, there's a scene where his girlfriend becomes his ex-girlfriend or fiance or whatever. I think it's girlfriend. At the very beginning of the movie is throwing his stuff out of the apartment, which is already pretty stock cliche. Well, yeah. But he notices people are running away wearing his clothes because they're picking it up off the street, and he sees a guy in his jacket, and he turns toward the camera to look at the guy running away. He goes, "Hey, that's my jacket." And there's like barely any facial expression, and that's how Norm Macdonald is, but in the movie it just doesn't work.
It's like Ray Romano.
Kinda, yeah. So that was not very funny.
Alrighty then.
I watched the new Jumanji, Welcome to the Jungle. Uh,
How was that? I've heard a lot of good things about that.
did not like the I didn't like the end cap segments. I didn't like the start or the end because it's just so cliche with teenage whatever angst and drama and
Well, right, yeah.
guy is nerdy and the girl in gym who's like, I don't understand why we have to do physical education. It doesn't edify the soul or the mind. Like, it's just these archetypes that we've seen before.
Right.
However, even though I think those segments are bad, they make the middle so much better because the middle is all of these. Because basically, Jumanji is a video game in this one. It
Yeah,
it
I
start
remember that one.
yeah. So they get sucked into it, and they're now these characters. Like the really nerdy guy is Dwayne the Rock Johnson, and the pretty girl is Jack Black. So it actually works to that end because they're these archetypes, but now they're these actors that are sort of the opposite of the archetypes, trying to act like the archetypes. The entire middle of the movie is actually very fun, and I like it a lot. I wish the high school segments that cap off the film were done better, but I think
Right.
maybe they had to be done that way to make the middle as good as it was.
I think that probably was the idea of it. Like, everyone knows the archetypes so well that it's fun to see them completely flipped on their head in a way we haven't really seen before.
Right. I was surprised. I was surprised that I actually did enjoy most of the movie, yeah. Um, and then sort of getting into the Winnie the Pooh side of things, I caught a bit of Pooh Bear fever because I remembered how much I liked Winnie the Pooh, so I went back and watched The Search for Christopher Robin and the Tigger movie, both of which were just side movies. I think one was direct to video, and then the Tigger movie, I believe, was in theaters. But I owned both of them on VHS growing up, and I liked them. So I went back and I rewatched them in lieu of watching these other Pooh movies, and you know I like them. They're definitely weaker than these
Yeah.
stories because they're trying to create their own. They're trying to create their own stories. So even though they incorporate some of the personalities of the character, they're trying to write their own adventures that aren't in the original book, which doesn't inherently matter. But I think that's sort of where they had trouble, just because it doesn't have the same feeling
Right.
as those. I
Like this.
mean, one they go into like a crystal palace. In the Search for Christopher Robin, they go through scary woods and they go into a crystal palace at the end, and it's really bizarre. Obviously, at the end, it's like, oh, they travel back through it with Christopher Robin. And it's like, well, the fact that you were afraid, like this is just a meadow and this is just a small boulder, but it's still weird to see them doing that.
Right. Yeah, that is a little weird. Yeah. Like that always seems to kind of be the thing with newer versions of classics. They always try to kind of reinvent the wheel with it,
Right.
which is like nothing terribly wrong with that, but it kind of ends up losing a lot,
Mm-hmm.
which I'll probably go into more later.
Definitely. But that leads me to the last thing I saw, which was Christopher Robin. We both saw this in theaters,
Yes,
albeit
we did.
different theaters, different locations, but we both watched it.
I fucking loved it.
I did too. I really did.
Like I got a lot of mixed reactions from various people, but I actually like this a whole lot. Like I got the whole thing. It's like, oh, we've heard this story a million times before. It's like you have to remember, like, we've seen a lot of movies, and there's been a lot of movies like this in the past. There's kind of needs to be a new one for each new generation. Like we can't just keep relying on people to go back to the same old ones. Sometimes they don't age well.
Right, and not to mention, sure, the type of story has been done before, but it holds more clout. There's more innocence in it because it is Winnie the Pooh.
Right.
And anyone will tell you that if you look at online like official AFI and the IMDb polls of like cartoon characters, I don't know
Mm.
exactly where they stand, but I know that officially more people love and cherish and recognize Winnie the Pooh than they do Mickey Mouse. I think Mickey Mouse ranked number 2 on Disney's most recognizable and beloved characters, and Pooh was number 1.
Yeah. Like it's always been interesting how universal that's been. It's like I wonder what it is. I think it's just like the pure joy of it. Like I think everybody's like everyone loves a teddy bear, that kind of thing. Versus Mickey Mouse has had such a weird omnipresence in like everything from childhood cartoons to Kingdom Hearts. And so it kind of creates this weird image for the character versus Winnie the Pooh has just kind of always just been, bear very little brain, loving honey way too much, and as a result, every time one of his things comes out, honey sales I'm sure spike.
Right. That. I actually like that you mentioned Kingdom Hearts 2 because that's like they update Mickey for that game. It's hilarious to see him in the game like,
Yeah.
well, that's the key to darkness. And then it cuts to him and it's just short ass Mickey Mouse in a cloak talking about forces of good and evil. But
Kingdom Hearts is the stupidest thing in the world, I swear to God.
It is remarkably stupid and I still love it.
Oh, I still love it. It's incredible,
right.
and I can't wait for the third one.
Neither can
if
I.
only because I cannot wait to hear like Mike Wazowski, imitator say all these various lines. It's like, wow, this is gonna be a shit show.
Zora, look out! It's Randall. But
Randall's teamed up with the Heartless.
Oh God, it'll be Spider
Boy. Amazing. Oh yeah.
But that being said, where I was going with that sort of is Winnie the Pooh is also in Kingdom Hearts, but
oh yeah, but he's But even in that, he's still just kind of like a small side thing.
That's what I'm saying. They don't update it like Mickey Mouse. They have to add him to this story of light, dark, whatever. But Winnie the Pooh, they don't do that. He exists in his own world. The Heartless can't even go there. Like in the second one, they like rip up the book, but they don't enter the book. It's just they're self-contained. They're so blissfully ignorant of everything around them, and that's sort of how Winnie the Pooh should be.
Yeah, I know. I love it so much, and I love how it's like at the end of each of the chapters when you found a new page, it was like a little reward. It's like, here, you've gone through all this, hellish fighting. Now you get to have a Winnie the Pooh adventure. Hooray!
You get to do a mini game where you push him on a swing.
I know, it's just the sweetest thing. I love it so much, and that really just kind of sums it up.
Right, and that's why it works so well in Christopher Robin. It doesn't mean that we've seen this story. It doesn't matter that we've seen this story before. He lost his way. He doesn't remember what it's like to be a child. No more innocence. The fact that Winnie the Pooh is there, it holds a lot more clout, like I was saying before, because Winnie the Pooh is like the embodiment of childhood innocence. So it feels like, even though it's come so much later than all these other movies that have done the same thing, it feels like it is the pinnacle of them. I would be willing to say, even if it's not the best done one, it feels like it's the one that should be remembered, I suppose.
Yeah, I really I gotta agree with it. It's just it just kind of culminates in all these various elements with that, and plus it also does also turn into a little Winnie the Pooh adventure. It's not just a ham-handed, oh, he's not a child anymore. It's like, no, it ends up with his like this whole little smaller adventure, which I won't spoil. Obviously, it's a very good film. Go see it.
Right, and you're probably gonna know what scene I'm talking about. I'm not gonna say it for slight spoilerish whatevers, but there's a part kind of in the middle of the movie, but sort of near the beginning, where it's just Christopher Robin and Pooh walking, and the dialogue exchange that's had there. I didn't cry or tear up, but whenever you're sort of upset at something and you get that weird pressure feeling in the back of your throat.
Oh yeah,
near your sinuses,
like you're getting choked up.
Right? Yeah, I guess that's what it is.
Yeah.
I haven't felt that in a really long time, but I actually got that during that scene because it made me really sad, and I haven't experienced something like that in a long time.
Oh yeah, I had that a couple of times throughout this movie, like at the very end and everything. It has very idealistic scenes, the yada yada yada, and it's just like it hit something deep in my cold little heart at this point. I was like, oh my God, my childhood.
Right. It sort of had an ending that I like to describe. I like to describe those types of endings as not what your brain wants, but what your heart wants.
Yeah, exactly.
Because there's so many instances where I'll watch a movie and it's like, I don't know, someone has cancer, and at the end of the movie it's like, oh, she's all better somehow, miraculously. It's like, well, that's not really much of an ending. But
But at the
sometimes,
same time, we like a happy ending, goddammit.
right, and sometimes if a movie does it right, even if your brain's like, well, that's not logical, or I don't think they should have done that from a movie telling standpoint, if it's done right, or if you are invested in the lore or the characters well enough, then I sort of write it off as an ending that your brain didn't want, but your heart did want, and I accept it as that anyways.
Yeah.
Because it makes
Yeah.
me happy.
I liked it a whole lot for that very reason.
Me
It was
too.
good for my heart. Maybe
I
not the greatest in exact filmmaking, but even then, it was actually very well made.
Oh yeah.
Effects are great.
The only thing that bothered me in the not in the movie, but when I watched the trailer, was that Tigger looked so old. He looked like he should have
Right, I
been
thought the
bouncing
whole-
with a cane.
Like, I thought the idea of it was like they were meant to be like really old and faded, but no one else was. So I was like, huh, Tigger just hasn't had a good time of it.
Did you notice that for all the characters, they went back to the designs they had in the book?
Yeah.
Except for Tigger, they kept his jawline and everything. I guess because Pooh was always, even when they updated Pooh for Disney, he still sort of resembled that. They just gave him the red shirt. But Tigger, they did a complete overhaul at Disney. They gave him a very specific jawline that he has to have now.
Right.
So,
Yeah, that was interesting.
yes, it was. Well, for the many adventures of Winnie the Pooh starting out, 1977, this movie is essentially a collection of short stories, taken from the two children's books that were penned by A.A. Milne, Winnie the Pooh and the House at Pooh Corner. So I'm not going to go into great detail about the movie because there's not much to go into detail about. The stories are, even though they connect a little bit and they thread together in the slightest of ways, they're so self-contained that there's not really much of a point. But these stories include Pooh disguising himself as a rain cloud to obtain honey, Pooh getting stuck in Rabbit's doorway due to eating too much honey, him having a nightmare about heffalumps and woozles, which are imaginary creatures that steal honey.
Kind of borrowing from, Elephants on Parade on that one.
A little bit, yeah.
Or was Elephants on Parade borrowing from it? I can't remember the continuity.
Whoa. I don't know about that. I wonder if the books came out before the Dumbo film did. Because Dumbo was like Disney's third or fourth feature, I believe.
All I know is that seems to be a weird recurring theme in early Disney cartoons. Weird psychedelic dreams involving elephants.
Right. But anywho, additionally, we also have the other characters in the film. We're introduced to Tigger, who gets himself and Roo stuck in a tree, and whom Rabbit attempts to get lost in a forest, for starters. Near the end of the movie, I guess, is an extremely windy day, which they call Wednesday, which destroys Al's house. There's a great flood that nearly sucks up Pooh and Piglet. And I mean, those are sort of the beats of the story. Anything can happen in this world, and it's just characters reacting to it, like what they're given, the environments that they're in, the scenarios that they're in. How are they going to react? How do they talk to one another and come up with solutions to these problems that they're faced
Which I guess is kind of the point, being child's imaginary toys going through. It's like, oh, here's a random situation. Well, hey,
Right. That's exactly what it is too. But
like they really do play up the idea that this is a kid's imaginary, day and what all goes through all his toys' minds and everything.
right, what do they do when he's not there? They're the stories that he's telling himself. But throughout these many adventures, we meet a colorful cast of characters outside of Pooh, Piglet, and Tigger, who have already been mentioned. These including Rabbit, Owl, Kangaroo, Eeyore, Christopher Robin, and for a brief period of time, Gopher. The movie ends with a sort of party that's held for Pooh and Piglet, who showed bravery during the flood and gave up his house to Owl, respectively.
Gave up is a bit of a subjective term, but fair.
Well, he even though he was hesitant, he just sort of did it, and then the movie ends. I mean, which is the same thing in the book, so it's like, okay, I guess Owl lives in Piglet's house now. And no one cares.
That's the plot of so many of the stories, is Piglet being bullied into submission.
No one really cares for Piglet.
Yeah, well, a little bit.
They like him, but, like, who cares?
That poor little, overly polite little boy. Girl, I don't know.
But the movie closes on a heartwarming scene between Pooh and Christopher Robin, his best friend in the world, as they both pledge to be there for one another and to never forget each other as well.
As, Christopher's going off to school, which, raises the question of, which sequel do we take to account? Do we take Christopher Robin or the next Winnie the Pooh film? Because they both have different answers of what kind of school it is.
Right. Moving on from there, as you said, the next Winnie the Pooh film, Winnie the Pooh, which came out in 2011. This movie is a lot more structured than the 1977 Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh film, but it also pulls less from the original source material, opting instead to write its own story with the personalities of the original characters still intact. There's really two stories that it takes for inspiration, but one of them, it stretches over the course of the whole film, and they write their own plot to it, because basically all they take from the story is Al misreading a piece of paper, and then they build it from there.
Which, I feel like that almost comes up in a few stories even.
Right, there are quite a few instances of characters not knowing how to read or not knowing how to communicate with one another, and that's what leads to the rest of the story, or the rest of the adventure.
Miscommunication, the cartoon.
That's all it ever is. But the movie itself opens with Pooh hungering for honey, only to discover that he's fresh out. On his way to search for some, he proceeds to meet Eeyore, who, surprise, surprise, has lost his tail. With a little help from Al and Christopher Robin, the denizens of the 100-acre woods organize a contest to find the best replacement tail, with the reward being a pot of honey. They all try. Sorry?
A really blasé contest, I might add. No real judging structure. They just immediately, every instance of a possible tale, they're just like, you win!
Yeah, you win the honey. Hooray.
Which happens 5 times.
Not to mention, that's such a weak prize. Tigger doesn't even like honey, so he can't even participate.
Yeah.
They should have picked something that everyone could enjoy.
Yeah. How dare they not pick up on their own lore?
Well, regardless, they all try, fail, and decide to reconvene the following day. The next day, Pooh goes to see Christopher Robin, only to find a note on his door saying he's gone out. Pooh, being a bear of very little brain, cannot read it, so he takes it to Owl's house, where everyone is gathered, and Owl misreads the note, claiming Christopher Robin has been abducted by a creature known as the Baxen. They all come up with a plan to catch the Baxen, helmed by Rabbit, and they set out to make it happen, all the while Pooh still being hungry from apparently not having eaten in over 24 hours?
Round about at that point.
Right, it's been an entire day now. He woke up, was hungry, they tried to find a tail for Eeyore, and then he woke up and was still hungry. While they're all setting the trap, however, Tigger takes Eeyore under his wing as Tigger 2 in an attempt to better track and catch the Baxen themselves, only to end up with Tigger wandering aimlessly in a slapdash Baxen disguise, and Eeyore hiding from him at the bottom of a lake, lest he have to endure Tigger's shenanigans. Having fully set up the trap, Pooh ends up springing it, because he's an idiot, and he was craving the empty jar of honey that they had placed over a pitfall.
He literally fell for the honey pot.
He fell for it after having already fell for it once before.
I mean, in his defense, he did have a full-on honey-ridden hallucination for a while, so he probably wasn't thinking straight.
He did. Everything is honey is one of the lyrics in that song, as he so claims. Just everything is honey. Who cares? I'll eat whatever.
I think it might be the name of the song.
It might be. I have to look on IMDb. Check the songwriting credits. Well, his friends are clueless to help him, but Eeyore comes to the rescue with an anchor that he found at the bottom of the lake. This plan backfires, pulling everyone but Piglet and the wandering Tigger into the pit with them, with Pooh, I suppose. After multiple misunderstandings, the group sends Piglet off to obtain a jump rope from Christopher Robin's house, only for Piglet to come across Tigger in his disguise, frightening him and causing him to run away, crashing into the letters of the storybook that they're in. These letters proceed to fall into the pit, creating a ladder that lets everyone escape from it. Christopher Robin then miraculously arrives from the bushes, explaining to everyone what his letter meant, and they all have a hearty chuckle and an angry stare at Owl, who proceeds to run away. The next day, Pooh goes to Owl's house for a bite to eat, now presumably going 2 entire days on an empty stomach.
God help that poor little bear.
Only to find Eeyore's tail, remember from the beginning of the film, that plot point. Owl took it cluelessly, apparently, and had been using it as a bell ringer for his door. Pooh...
Yeah, the strip stole it off of poor Donkey's ass.
Yeah, he didn't...
Like, no one responded when I pulled it, so I just stole it. It's like, there's no real justification for having him done it. He just was like, well, I just took it.
Well, I flew into the part of the woods that Eeyore usually resides, and just found this hanging off of a donkey's ass, and no one was using it.
Did not give a damn.
I rang it twice and no one answered, so it's mine now. You know, not like no one was home. If you really thought it was a door knocker, that's the equivalent of knocking on someone's door. They're not home, so you rip the door off the house and take it.
At least the knocker.
Right. Regardless, he took it cluelessly and was using it. Pooh takes it to Eeyore, Christopher Robin pins it on the sad donkey, and Pooh is rewarded with a large pot of honey, which he proceeds to climb into and swim around in aimlessly. We're treated to the credits, and we have an after-credits scene revealing the Baxon to be real, who picks up a few of the things that they left out for him, and then falls into a pit, claiming that he hopes whoever left all the stuff behind would be back soon. And then the movie ends.
I didn't even see the after credits thing.
Oh, really? Well, you
you
kind of have to sit through all the credits first.
Yeah, the credits would take up a good fifth of the entire runtime.
Right. But yeah, those are both of the movies. Definitely spent a lot more time describing the second one because there's more structure to it as a film.
Ironic considering that one's even shorter than the original.
Yeah, it's only like an hour and 4 minutes, I think.
And that's not even accounting for credit time. Like, when you take that out, it's maybe closer to 50 minutes or 45.
Right.
It's like, I remember first seeing this in the theater and I was kind of flabbergasted. I was like, wait, that's it?
How much did I pay for this ticket?
Yeah, I paid a full movie price ticket for what is essentially just a TV special.
You know, I'm going to theater hop into the next one by me, and that is also going to account for this ticket, because I did not pay to just watch a TV movie in the theater.
Yeah, I'll go see insert timely 2011 movie reference.
I was actually thinking of one, and I couldn't think of a movie that came out in 2011. I was like, oh, we did True Grit. That was 2010.
Close enough.
Yeah, let's just say you went and saw True Grit.
Yeah, I saw True Grit. That's where I saw it originally. Hooray!
Hooray! Pooh Bear and True Grit double feature at the drive-in. Go tonight. So, that being said, now that the synopses are covered... what?
I'm imagining the Mr. Forrester guy, but he's wearing Pooh's pants.
There's a rumbly in my tumbly. Oh, man, I want a photo edit of that. That'd be great.
Internet, get on it, please.
I might just do that myself. That sounds great.
I might draw it.
Well,
anyway, you were saying?
With both of the synopses taken care of, let's go into the full circle segment. Music.
Hooray!
Music, please. Alright, so this one is also fairly short, and I believe I've already mentioned this connection previously, possibly on the True Grit episode, but before that, sound, camera, and music department similarities between Winnie the Pooh, the 2011 Winnie the Pooh, and a lot of other movies we've covered. the 83 Scarface, the 84 Ghostbusters, uh, Blade Runner 2049, I believe. There's a lot of crossover with those departments in plenty of the movies we've talked about. Like, too numerous for me to just list.
God, imagine the resume of sound designers in Hollywood.
It's got to be like a mile long. They get around a lot. So do stunt workers. I've found.
There must not be a whole lot, there is a whole lot.
Right. I mean, yeah, it's department, so they usually have a lot of those people. It's not like actors where you have one role. You have to work throughout the whole movie, even if they partition it to particular people.
Right.
But that being said, sort of the main one to bring up is John Fiedler, character actor John Fiedler, who was not only Piglet in Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh, but I believe he was the voice of Piglet up until, like, 2005. I think he was the official voice of Piglet. Dang. And around that time, he either retired and then passed away, or he just passed away. But he's definitely gone now, right? But he was lawyer J. Noble Daggett in John Wayne's True Grit, 1969.
Really?
Yes, definitely shows up at the end of the film, and either on the episode or off the episode, I do remember bringing that up because I
do remember that now.
Right, I grew up with him as Piglet, and then started seeing all the other work he had done. So every time I see it, I'm like, oh, there's that Piglet guy. And then soon enough, I learned his name, John Fiedler. I remember in school we watched 12 Angry Men, and he's one of the jury members. And I saw him. He's in the Meek Shall Inherit episode of the Twilight Zone where the man becomes Santa Claus. He's like the head of the mall. And I heard his voice, and I was like, that's Piglet. That's the Piglet guy. And being a character actor, he really gets around in old Hollywood, and he's in a lot of TV shows and a lot of old movies.
Well then, but I learned something today.
Right, he just has that voice.
Such is the way of full circle.
Right. If we want to do a little bit of full circle that I didn't write down, just that I sort of know offhand, I don't remember the name, but one of my favorite episodes of The Twilight Zone is a married couple get a TV and it stops working, so they have a TV repairman come in and fix it, and it starts showing visions of the future, of them in the future, or their future lives, which causes them to commit crimes and plot to kill each other. But the TV repairman is Sterling Holloway, original voice of Winnie the Pooh.
Oh.
And it's another guy who's just like, his voice is Pooh Bear's voice, so every time you hear him speak, you're like, that's Pooh Bear, it's Sterling Holloway. He was also Cheshire Cat, and he was the mouse in the Aristocats. He did a lot of stuff for Disney.
Well then.
Yep.
Ain't that something?
That's sort of the end of my segment.
All right then. Thank you for listening to Full Circle.
Consider the circle closed.
In at least some fashion.
Right. Hey, that's my new ending. Oh, that's how I should end the segments now, huh?
Hey. We're learning.
Yes. Okay, so where do
growth?
But where do you sort of want to go from here? Because there's a lot of different things to talk about. There's art style, there's voice acting, there's just sort of the interactions, storytelling.
I mean, I kind of figured I'd start from like my whole general thought process of this whole deal. Like it's, like, I mean, first of all, this is the first animated film we've done, so it's a bit different structure already, which you'll probably be a bigger expert on this, you with your knowledge of voice acting and that sort of thing.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, like you're definitely better at it than me, that's for dang sure. But it was an interesting thing to think about, because this is a rare opportunity to see a remake, or at least a reboot or reuse of a previous property by the same company as the original, because the original was still made by Disney, and then the 2011 version was also Disney, and so it's the same kind of art style, it's the same personality types, and they have really no need to change anything because they know how beloved it was. So it's interesting seeing not necessarily how big societal changes, but even seeing, like, with a lot of, various films, it's cool seeing just a company's changes, like the very distinct differences in, feeling of animation or plot or what have you in the 77 versus the 2011 version. And there's just like that alone just kind of breaks down the entire thing.
I guess that's true. I hadn't really thought about that. Especially in the movies we've covered, I think Ghostbusters might be the only one where the studio's the same. I think the others might have been different studios that got the rights.
Right.
But
And even then,
Ghostbusters was Paramount, and then Winnie the Pooh was Disney, and it's just the same company sort of reinventing the wheel
and
per
even
se.
then, like with, you know, Ghostbusters, they changed so much of the plot already that they really couldn't compare the two, two specifically in that regard. Versus this one, it's still very much the archetype of Winnie the Pooh, which is like, characters, certain personalities, and miscellaneous adventures. But
Right.
and so it just kind of creates a really cool, it's kind of like reading the rings on a tree. It's like, compare the two from one age to the next.
Right. And I guess part of that probably stems from the fact that this movie is a sequel to
Yeah,
the many adventures, but it's also a reboot because it's a sequel in that it's not telling the same story. It's
yeah,
telling different stories from the same source material using the same characters, but
and it is still definitely after the fact because it's like, Christopher Robin is definitely in school now, so he doesn't visit as often.
right. But you can tell even though they're not like explicitly this is Pooh Bear, this is Piglet. They have the opening song which is iconic, but then they also have another sort of reintroduction of characters once you get into the movie. Pooh's like, "Hello, Eeyore. Hello, Al." And there's the whole
Oh
thing
yeah,
where Tigger is stalking Pooh in the bushes, and I guess kids of a different generation maybe that somehow don't know what Winnie the Pooh is. This is their Winnie the Pooh. This is their introduction to it, so it's a surprise when Tigger attacks the balloon that Pooh's carrying, I guess.
yeah, that's true.
So I can definitely this is just as much a reboot as it is a sequel, which is interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of that weird fourth archetype we've always tried to find. It's just, taking the entire thing and just doing whatever the heck.
Right, it's the combination of them.
Yeah, it's a weird, hybrid situation from within the same family. So it's a hybrid and an inbred.
Right, but it does do that. It does do that well in that it carries the source material so much further.
Right.
And I alluded to that. Well, I didn't allude to it. I straight up said it when I was talking about the Tigger movie and the search for Christopher Robin. They sort of fall flat because they're trying to come up with their own stories, but even though they elaborate on the Baxon story from the book, because in the House at Pooh Corner story, it's just Pooh/Rabbit finds a note that says he'll be back soon. Al misreads it as Baxon, and then Rabbit runs around asking all the neighbors if they've seen a Baxon hanging out with Christopher Robin, and that's it. But they take that and just the personalities of the character and they're able to build on it, creating a story that feels like it was pulled straight out of the book.
Right.
And
With
then
like a bit differences with the, how they handle it. Like there's a certain mm, not not more energetic, but kind of more frantic feel of the newer one versus the older one. Like that's kind of seems like the more Disney this day and age, where things seem to be a bit more, you know, light the fire under the characters a bit faster, whereas the original was just kind of like dum de dum.
oh, definitely. There's like an entire adventure built out of it. The closest I feel you get to that in the original would be I guess Pooh's Nightmare or
Yeah,
when Rabbit, Pooh, and Piglet are trying to abandon Tigger in the woods, and those aren't really high paced, but they have some horror elements, particularly like towards kids, that I guess can build up that adrenaline. But there's nothing quite like it.
right. Yeah, it's just kind of like a nice little soft walk through the forest, which even the introductory song even kind of shows aspects of it. Like in '77, it's this whole classic older movie chorus kind of going on. and then the new one, it's sung by a very, very pleasant voiced lady who sounds like she probably cans her own beats.
I love that lady. Isn't it? I think the
It's
new
like,
one is it's someone I know. It's like Demi Lovato or something. I remember reading it and
that doesn't surprise me.
I knew it was
Either
some sort of
it's either the
Disney
archetype
star or
I've
something.
it's either the archetype I said or like some like kind of pop star who's done it for the recognition.
Right.
Which, again, kind of shows the differences of the times.
Right. That's gonna bother me for a little bit, but that's all right. I just wish I could remember. Oh, it's Zooey Deschanel.
Oh, okay, yeah, that. So it was both.
Yes, it was.
Perfect.
Excellent. That being said, though, if we're talking about the theme song real quick, I wanted to point out it's not something I noticed that I had a problem with until I watched the featurette that I have on the Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh DVD I own. And that's Zooey Deschanel does a fine job singing. Just it's that sort of melancholic without being sad, it still sounds somber.
Right.
And
kind of a weird term. It's kind of that weird middle ground where it's like it's a happy song, but it's being sung by someone that's like, trying to calm down a kid or something.
right. I'm not sure why it was done that way, but I understand that we can't have the choir in there doing it because kids don't. That doesn't pull with kids anymore. That was a very of the time Disney sort of thing, Thurl Ravenscroft and the choir singing it sort of deal. However, and I may be wrong, but they explain on the featurette that the original theme song is composed in such a way that the music itself introduces the characters alongside the lyrics. There's different instruments that play the theme song coinciding with the characters. Like there's like a bass tuba of some sort with Eeyore. There's a flute with Kanga, a clarinet with Owl,
Huh.
And they all
That's actually really clever.
right, they all play based on these characters, and I don't believe that that's present in the 2011 version of the theme song.
Yeah, I think
It's just her singing and then the background music.
It was like acoustic guitar, I think.
Right, I think so, yes. But
There may have been something, but it was subtle.
right.
But yeah, I definitely do remember that. I remember that in the original, I remembered enough that I realized, oh, that's what they were doing. Versus the new one, I was like, I don't really remember that at all.
Right. It was one of those things I recognized there were different instruments, but I never tied it to the fact that they specifically picked the instrument to play, like, based on what character they were in the middle of introducing, trying to link all the characters to specific types of instruments. I never realized that, and that made it so much cooler.
Oh yeah, it's kind of cool. It's always cool to see little moments of care with animations like that. Whenever it's like, oh, this is how we further describe this character without it necessarily being a character trope. You can just do stuff like that. It's cartoons. You can't really do that with characters in a live action film where all of a sudden the music changes abruptly whenever they're around. It's like that seems a little weird. Like imagine in True Grit, every time a new character would get introduced, a new type of slide guitar plays or something. Slide guitar? They didn't have slide guitar in that movie. What am I thinking?
The slide guitar, the famous slide guitar.
I'm thinking of like other Western movies right now. I'm sorry. I played Borderlands the other day, and it's just in my head now.
So why wasn't Claptrap in 100 Acre Woods? Tell me that.
I thought Claptrap would technically be Pooh.
I guess no. Claptrap is not nearly lovable enough to be Pooh.
Well, I guess that's also the nature of the Borderlands world. Nothing's really lovable.
I guess so.
Who did the voice acting for Tigger in the 77 version?
Oh, Paul Winchell.
Okay.
He was like the voice of Gargamel in the original Smurfs. He was Dick Dastardly in Wacky Races.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, he did a lot of that.
I just wasn't sure if it was the same person who did Pooh, like in the new one, like how Jim Cumming did
Right.
Pooh and Tiglet. Tiglet?
Tiglet,
Tigger.
my favorite character.
Oh God.
No,
But yeah, each of them.
no. Well, Jim Cummings took over as Pooh for Sterling Holloway, while Paul Winchell was still alive doing Tigger. And then once Paul Winchell passed, Jim Cummings took on Tigger as well because he could do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, that voice is still consistent too. The only character whose voice, and this isn't counting Christopher Robin, by the way, because a little boy is just a little boy.
But yeah, it's like whatever.
The only character whose voice is like never consistent is Rabbit. Every time you see a version of Rabbit, it's like a completely different voice. It's like they're not even trying to replicate one another. It just shifts constantly.
Yeah. Like, which I guess is okay. Like, even Rabbit's personality has never been terribly consistent. Like, in the 77 version, he's kind of just various like kind of stickler type. Like, it's kind of like that one annoying neighbor you have. Versus in the new one, he almost seems like manic in a lot of ways, which I guess again is like kind of like that annoying neighbor you have, but in a more modern sense. Like back in the day, it may have just been like a nuisance type, versus now it's like straight up a little bit whack. Which
right, I can see that. It's just like, so we go from the 77 movie, which is all those shorts that Disney did before the movie came out, and Rabbit's like the very uppity, like, Tigger, please, sort of voice. Yeah. Afterwards, we go into A Day for Eeyore, and he's like, well, Pooh, blah, blah, blah. And then the Seasons thing I mentioned before the show, which was like an educational thing they did.
Right, like an extra little bit.
He sounds like a boring old school teacher. He still has that nasal thing, but it like completely changes. We get into the Search for Christopher Robin Tigger movie sort of era, and it kind of goes back to the way it was. Maybe I'm just showing, because especially like newer voice actors, I just know who they are at this point. I just hear them and I know who it is, so maybe that's my flaw. But as soon as I heard Rabbit speak in the 2011 one, I was like, oh, that's Tom Kenny. That's SpongeBob doing Rabbit. It was just the first thing that I thought as soon as I heard it.
Yeah.
So maybe that's my own fault. But then we go into Christopher Robin and it's completely changed again. All the characters sort of have that style, but now Rabbit's just like stock British person.
Yeah, he's just kind of. I think it's always just kind of meant to be like Rabbit's just meant to be like a foil to Pooh's shenanigans, and that's depending on the time that has to change a little. And so with that kind of character, it can never really be consistent no matter what you do. And then he barely had a purpose at all in the Christopher Robin film. He was really just there to just kind of flesh out the cast.
Right, Kangaroo, Rabbit, and Owl like did nothing.
Oh yeah, they were completely to the background, which kind of sucked, but.
Yeah, a little. Tigger was my favorite character growing up, but man, going back through these, Rabbit is the MVP character. I love him.
He really is kind of an unsung hero. My favorite was always Eeyore, and Eeyore absolutely steals it in Christopher Robin. Like, they turned his depressing relatability up to 11 with this one. I was like, oh my god, Eeyore, you poor bastard.
Right. He really does steal a lot of that movie. Voiced by Brad Garrett of Everybody Loves Raymond fame.
Oh, fun.
He really does steal that picture. And Eeyore, I guess I do like Eeyore a lot, and I think that's because Eeyore and Rabbit are probably the most relatable characters in the Pooh franchise.
A little bit, yeah.
You can identify with them so easily. Every time Tigger messes up something Rabbit's doing, I'm just like, oh, come on, really? Did he really just do that? And then he's just going to bounce away?
It's like, peace out, yo.
What a miserable life.
At least for Rabbit.
Yeah. But that being said, I that was just something that I noticed, is that you can sort of tell the voices change, but they even keep that consistent, because at this point, those are the voices people know. But
oh yeah,
Rabbit's is fairly dynamic.
And like we've, all of us of our generation and previous have probably rewatched the 77 version so much that those voices are burned into our brains for the rest of our lives. Like even to the point where when I first saw the trailers for Christopher Robin, that I heard, Jim Cummings is, the voice of Pooh again, and my brain immediately thought, it's like, oh, they have the same voice actor as from the original one. It's like, which I then had to think, no, that's not probably true.
Right,
But
that's
it's like
not
they're
possible.
so similar and they're so well kept that it's like, oh yeah, these are just the voices we've always come to know. It's just this is the most recent, iteration of it.
Right, that's the truest. That's the true MVP Jim Cummings.
Oh
Just
yeah,
side note on that, he honest to God is my Jim Cummings is my favorite voice actor. That's not a flip flop thing. That really is what I tell everybody. Just
oh
because
really?
he's so dynamic, and he does Louisianan accents really well, which I always enjoy, that sort of bayou thing. He does
Yeah.
those really well, and he can do a Sterling Holloway so well that he's just Disney's official Pooh. He's Disney's official Cheshire Cat right now because he can do those voices.
Oh yeah, like he's dead on all the time.
Right. Oh, and of course he's Disney's official Tigger, lest we forget.
Right. Lest we so obviously forget. Yeah, it's just and like it's interesting hearing like all of that, like how consistent all the characters are, and that's all. It's because of that they kind of had a weird flip flop feeling with going from like obviously I watched the '77 version before I watched the 2011 version, and like watching it one after the other, it's really weird. Like you have the same characters, but the structure of the 2011 one is so different that it's kind of jarring. Like, and that's kind of really does come back to like comparing a, a big such a company like Disney's old work with their new work, where the entire feeling of it's changed. Where I kind of mentioned it had this whole the new Disney has a lot more of a frantic feeling to it. For some reason, I got like a lot of like Frozen, Rapunzel vibes from the 2011 version. Just kind of the like almost forcibly upbeat feeling to it. To the part where, like it doesn't really give you a chance to let your heart rate go down, so to speak. That's not to say like Winnie the Pooh is making my heart race or anything. It's like
Right.
it's like oh my god, the Baxton, I'm gonna have a heart attack.
No, I get that. The 77 one is a lot more somber, and there's plenty.
Right.
And that's not to say it's a sad movie. It definitely is happy and upbeat, but the characters are so laid back in doing what they're doing.
Oh yeah,
Like,
and it's like it's a long, and it's a movie that's it's only like an hour and 15 minutes, but so much of that is just moments of almost quietness or just like moments of, you know, lags between dialogue, and it still kind of makes the film.
yeah, and sort of the, not to completely break the show, but sort of a
Hmm.
really good companion piece to that is Disney's The Jungle Book, which came out around the same time as the 77 Pooh movie. And
Right.
that's also a very somber. It has a lot more hectic scenes because there's more action in it, but there's plenty of times where it's laid back. You get this, in the Jungle Book's case, jazzy sort of music just lightly in the background to just show you how laid back everything can be. And if you take that and compare it to Winnie the Pooh, that's sort of what's happening throughout the entire movie. Characters will talk, and then they'll stop while they're doing something, and it's just the whatever the music is in the background playing.
Oh yeah. And this is a smaller point. I just remembered because you compared the two. I actually do know they both came out pretty similar because in a similar time because um, I remember seeing a piece online that showed there's an animation cell or series of animation like frames that are copy pasted from one movie to the next between Winnie the Pooh and Jungle Book. It's of the Mowgli slash Christopher Robin climbing over a log over a river, and they
Yeah,
actually played them side by side, and they're the exact same one, just colored differently,
that does make
which is
sense. That,
which is fine. Like obviously,
oh, definitely, I don't care. That does make sense. I was gonna say, even though I don't know the exact year of the Jungle Book, I know they came out in the same Disney period because that's the period where all the animation was the rough, scratchy lines that there's not solid lines. It's like 4 or 5 different scratches that make up the drawings. They're really rough. You know, The Sword and the Stone, The Aristocats, Jungle Book, and Winnie the Pooh all have that same art style.
Oh yeah,
Oh,
and I
and
love it.
Robin Hood. That's right.
Um, oh yeah, like that's a very very characteristic of that whole era, which is kind of defined a lot of Disney's greatest work. Um, but yeah, like there was actually one point I was gonna bring up about like back on the subject of like quieter moments, is that it reminds me of a specific technique seen a lot. It's actually a Japanese technique. It's the idea of ma, which means empty space, and actually Hayao Miyazaki, of Studio Ghibli fame,
Right.
talks about a lot, where there's just it gives the breathing room in a way during an animation or during a film that kind of lets you be immersed in its own reality, whereas a lot of modern movies kind of forget that, like think Michael Bay, where it's not allowed to give you any kind of breathing room, to the point where you're just like, this is just kind of boring, where it's you can't get absorbed in because everything is so balls to the wall at all times.
Right. I definitely, yeah, I feel that, and that's a good point. I've never heard that Miyazaki quote, but it definitely applies to his and
Oh yeah,
his
and
move.
obviously, yeah. You go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I was just gonna say his movies are inherently they're just a lot more action oriented. There's always more stuff happening, but he still finds time to put that stuff in. Like one of his earlier movies is Nausicaa Valley of the Wind, and there's fights with giant bugs constantly happening, yet they still have time for that sort of empty space feeling.
Right.
And I feel that like that does carry over, but it's a lot more noticeable in a film that doesn't have those sort of action oriented scenes in it, because then the film is composed almost entirely of that space with but it doesn't feel empty.
Yeah,
It's empty
and
space, but the
obviously,
movie doesn't feel empty.
right. And obviously, this isn't like it's not an exclusively Miyazaki thing. Like the word itself, it's one of those words that doesn't translate directly into any one word in any other language. It seems like every culture has some form of it, be it, you know, like resting points or breathing room, that sort of thing. And this movie kind of has its own version of it, where it's not necessarily breathing room in between action, like a lot of Japanese films like Miyazaki's style can tend to do, because they tend to still have, even in kids' movies, still have to have moments of huge action. Versus in these ones, it's more breathing room around moments of, I guess, attention, not even necessarily action. It's just like, oh, this is what's happening now.
Right.
So it's a more subtle effect. So it doesn't seem like there's as many peaks and valleys to it.
And I guess it's interesting to think about. I guess that's a very Winnie the Pooh point to make about all of this, is that a, a problem with the newer Winnie the Pooh film, the 2011 one, is that it lacks nothing. It
Yeah,
it needs more nothing in it to really capture that Winnie the Pooh feeling.
yeah. It's like someone took an art class and did a really paint by the numbers picture, which on all technical levels is absolutely perfect, but it lacks any kind of memorable feeling to it. Like, imagine if someone had made a paint by the numbers version of the Mona Lisa, where you could just pick each specific spot, put a very specific color in it, and then it made it perfectly. It's like, yeah, that's technically brilliant and beautiful, but it doesn't really hold on to anything.
Yeah, that's very true. I
It lacks the room for, like, it lacks crack. Actually, this is kind of a cool um, quote that I actually had growing up, was just because the ground has cracks in it, like, or how did it go? It's like, it's okay for the ground to have cracks. There, it's where all the most interesting things grow.
Oh, that is a nice.
Yeah,
Where'd you get that?
it must have been. I may have been just, like, just from my mom. Like this was just a thing I had. Like it was one of those quotes you get when you're growing up, where it's just like, oh, it's one of those generic quotes. It's like, oh, keep on going, keep maturing in a normal way, yada yada.
No, I definitely, yeah, I know those. That's,
Yeah,
yeah, I like that. It's
but
just,
I hadn't remembered that one for a while, and then there was that. I was like, oh yeah,
well, now it's preserved.
yeah,
But, yeah, that's sort of why I brought up that point of it lacking nothing is so, even though I do enjoy the new film, it's almost anti Winnie the Pooh in that respect, because
yeah,
if you
exactly.
look at the old film, the 77 version, and if you look at Christopher Robin that just came out, they have that quote taken straight
Taken,
from,
yes.
yeah, straight from the A.A. Milne book, that is basically Christopher Robin asks Pooh what's his favorite thing to do, and he's like, well, I don't know, eating honey. And Christopher Robin's like, well, I like doing nothing. Well,
Mm-hmm.
and Pooh sort of agrees with that. He likes doing nothing, but in the 2011 Winnie the Pooh movie, he's never not doing something. He's never doing nothing. They're always on the move. They're always doing something. Something's going on or happening that has
Right.
everyone's attention.
Whereas in like the 77 one, there's a distinct, there's a distinct emphasis put on like Pooh's thinking spot. Like that's a thing that shows up multiple times throughout the piece, and it's like nothing really comes of that even in many situations. It's like whatever action of that particular story that he's in comes not of what he was necessarily thinking there in some cases. It just kind of like happens and he's just like, "Oh, okay, now I'm doing this."
Right.
It's like that technically him being in that spot was pointless, but it was still significant. It still felt like him doing nothing, but he just didn't realize it.
Yeah. That's the sort of the character he is.
Right, and I love him for it.
Is that him doing nothing is still doing something, and even though he's too foolish to realize he's not doing anything, he's wise enough to realize that not doing anything is also technically doing something.
Right. And I think and it's actually kind of nice that that actually gets brought up in the Christopher Robin film. Not quite as well as the original, but it still does kind of hold weight. There are moments of just kind of peace and nothingness that I do get brought up nicely, and I'm glad they did it. Um, it's just kind of interesting to think back on, just comparing that to the 2011 version.
Right. And again, yeah, it is a very well put together movie, and even though it doesn't have the feeling, the characters' personalities are still they're really well intact. Their interactions with one each other
Mm-hmm.
are perfect. I really do. I think it's a good movie. It's just lacking that one thing, and that one thing just so happens to be almost the
Nothingness.
embodiment of Winnie the Pooh. Yeah.
Right. And it really is interesting to whenever you notice that it's almost like it's like this kind of weird maturing effect. It's like when you're a kid, there's just moments of nothing, and then when you get older, your personality's the same, but there seems to be a bit less space, which I'm probably reading into this more than I need to, but
No,
like
go on.
like obviously even an unintended message can still be a message where it's like watching one right after the other, the personalities and like personalities, voice, and pretty much every aspect of everything outside of the story seems perfectly intact from the 77 version to the 2011 version, so it really does feel like a sequel. So it feels like we're in the exact same place, even though it's been an immense amount of time between both situations, versus something like Ghostbusters, where it's definitely two different places. It's the same idea, but it's two different situations altogether.
Right.
Or even like Blade Runner 2049, where over that amount of time, just a lot's changed to the point where it has to be different. Whereas this one, it really does feel like we've just kind of grown from this situation, and as a result, there's kind of a loss of, you know, what we understood as, like, what we found to be peaceful, what we kind of found to be enjoyable.
Yeah, I do feel that.
And it's, the more I think about it, the more depressing it becomes. So, that's fun. And
Well,
then thinking about that on to Christopher Robin, where it's like, shows Christopher Robin leaving the 100 Acre Wood and going into the real world and going into World War II. It's just like, oh my God, I'm getting killed here. It's like,
That was very
oh my
strange.
Jesus.
That was very strange. I was not expecting that. Even though I know that's the time frame, I was not expecting
Well,
that in the
yeah,
movie. Uh,
but yeah, they did not hold back in that whole thing. It's just like, if you wanted to like kind of imagine it as being, the '77 version, then the 2011 version, then Christopher Robin as all one big sequence of events. Notable continuity errors notwithstanding, it's actually kind of a weird situation of watching a movie mature, like physically mature over a realistic amount of time.
right. Man, that is depressing. Okay,
Yeah,
let's move off. Let's move off. Let's move off the depressing things
yeah. Let's
and
move into
talk
more
about
general
yeah. Let's talk
analysis.
about something else. Like Eeyore. Let's
Let's move from the depressing things to Eeyore.
let's talk about Eeyore. Uh, you know he even though my favorite character is Rabbit, he holds a lot of comparing the two movies. In both instances, he sort of gets the brunt of the jokes. I feel like the jokes are more likely to land when he's delivering them
Right.
because of that. I guess because of that woe is me personality that is so relatable to anyone.
Yeah. It's just, yeah. It really he really just is the embodiment of like you on your worst day, and so it's the perfect relatable little foil to have for it. It's like, oh, even though there's all this, they're still friends.
Eeyore gets me. Oi. That being said, I'm glad that they sort of changed his personality from the book to those
Mm.
cartoons to just be depressing, because he's in the novel. He's still sad and gloomy all the time, but he's also an asshole. He's just mean. He calls people stupid, and he's like, Pooh, Piglet, they just don't understand because they're idiots. Like,
Oh.
I don't like this character.
It's like Winnie the Pooh in the Winnie the Pooh comics. Like, have you ever seen those? Where
No.
like they must have just been like newspaper comics or something. But there's just a series of comics where Pooh is just a straight up dick. Like, he goes from just being like kind of clueless to just being outright kind of rude to some of the people. Like, um, Piglet would say something kind of inane, or something like that, or something that wasn't even not necessarily too inane, but just kind of like senseless. And Pooh would just go, "You are a terribly, terribly ignorant little thing, Piglet," or something to those lines.
Oh my god.
And I wish I knew one offhand. And I'm actually tempted to look one up now because it's just Pooh is vicious in them. It's so funny.
That's more vicious than he is just senseless, I guess. In the this is quickly becoming an analysis of all things Winnie the Pooh, which
Yeah.
we won't harp on it too much, but just to bring up to that point, I guess it's in the A Day for Eeyore short, which popped up after the movie. I think that might
Oh
be
yeah.
it. Correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't think it's in either of the other movies, but it's them celebrating Eeyore's birthday, which everyone forgot about.
I think that may have been like one of the cartoon, like one of the serialized cartoons.
It might have been, but I know it's pulled from a story in the original books. But he has that childlike wonder about him, and that he says he's gonna give Eeyore a pot of honey for his birthday, and Piglet's like, "Oh, can it also be from me?" And he sort of looks at the pot, and he's like, "That's not a good idea." And you can see his thought process, and you instantly understand he's being selfish, which is a very childlike thing, which is perfect for Pooh. He's like, "Well, I thought of this gift. I want it to be just from me. You can give him something else. You're
Right.
not butting in on my good deed for the day."
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah, it's a little harsh.
something I wanted to bring up to that effect. Well, not to that effect, but I'm gonna relate it somehow. Is
Uh-huh.
there's a very thin thread in the original movie, since they're all just, it's essentially a compilation of theatrical shorts that sort of connects them all, and it's still there, but it's very small. Whereas they get away with having continuity more so in the new one because it's just one big story, and then they took the other story and put it at the beginning and end, so it technically ties together. But you get little glimpses of it throughout, and I really enjoy it. I really do enjoy that. It's through character interaction and the way they remember things that happened earlier in the film. And that's something I actually do kind of wish was more present in the older one.
Like some thread of like actual, continuity.
Right, just them remembering what's happened. Like there are things like, well, very basic, like Tigger showed up and now everyone knows that Tigger exists because he exists in the movie. Or Eeyore interrupting the party at the end because he found Owl's house because he was searching for a new house for Owl that whole time. Those are like the only two real instances I can think of. But
I mean, that's also like, letting back to the fact that these originally were separate shorts, and so
right,
they had to be kind of each self-contained.
Right, and I do understand that, but it still is a desire that I have.
Right.
And they do it so well to sort of give more points, since we were complaining about the 2011 one for the longest time.
Yeah.
To give it some points to that, some of the best moments in the movie are points that are continuity based and you just don't think about them, like Eeyore dragging the anchor from the lake to rescue that. He wouldn't be able to do that if his tail wasn't missing. It's attached to the nail where his tail usually would be.
Yeah.
But since his tail's not there, it's almost like the anchor is the newest audition for Eeyore's tail, even though they don't directly mention it, and I think that's cool.
It's kind of funny how Eeyore comes in singing gloomily singing the "Hooray, You Won" song that everyone always sings whenever someone finds a new tail, and so it's like,
I didn't think about that.
It's me. So it's like even that adds a little bit more to it. It's like, oh, that's cute.
I didn't think about that. Yeah, that makes it even a further continuation of the tail storyline.
Right, because he's playing it up himself.
Right, and another Eeyore point of continuity that is more a joke than anything else. I love in the Baxon song that Owl starts, where they're all giving their ideas to what the Baxon does. The part where Eeyore goes, "I bet he gave me the cold I caught," which he never had a cold. Earlier in the film, they think that Owl's sneezing, and then Eeyore thinks that Owl gave him a cold. So he's continually building up this mythos that he's sick, even though he's not.
Yeah.
He still thinks he has a cold from like 20 minutes ago, and I thought that was hilarious.
He's still just like paranoid about it.
He still thinks he's getting sick.
Yeah, he's got like, I wonder what it's not even paranoia, it's just immediate resignation that the bad things will happen to me.
That's exactly what he says when Pooh says, "I think you're catching a cold." He's like, "It'll probably happen to me too."
Oh my god, it's I think our running moral of this one is Eeyore is without fault.
He did nothing wrong.
Eeyore did nothing wrong. He is a joy and just the absolute MVP of all three films we've talked about.
Right. In fact, he does more right than he does wrong. It's not his fault the anger plan failed.
Oh yeah, like that's the whole thing of it. He doesn't try. Like he's so depressed that he doesn't try to do anything, and so in that he doesn't nearly fail nearly as much as everyone else.
Right.
He's just kind of there, and so the few times that he is there, he ends up helping a lot more than he's ever hurt. So.
Yeah, right. And okay, so Eeyore, this is Eeyore cast now. In the original appearance of Eeyore, he's hyped up as this depressed donkey. He's sad and he's gloomy because he's sad and he's gloomy. But right off the bat in the newer film, they don't just intentionally be like, well, Eeyore's sad because he's depressing. They're like, Eeyore's sad because he has reason to be sad. The children's first introduction to him is his house being crushed in the theme song, and then him just looking at the camera like, yeah, this happens all the time.
So much emotion in that one stare.
Right. He's like, yeah, this is me.
He really is just the physical embodiment of that trope.
Imagine an Eeyore movie and it starts that way.
Oh my god, I would kill for that. Although I'm sure there has been films similar.
Well, there are a lot of movies that start with that "this is me" sort of thing, but
yeah,
if I saw Eeyore doing it, I wouldn't mind.
True.
Something else I wanted to go off of. I guess this is another strike against the 2011 Winnie the Pooh, because they cut back on it as the film went on, but as soon as it started, I knew there was going to be trouble, and that's the interplay with the narrator and the fact that they're in a book.
Oh yeah.
Because they sort of build up to that fact in the original one. I think they get an entire story across, and then the narrator tries to move on to the next chapter, and Pooh's like, well, I want to stay here. I'm still eating honey. And he's like touching the page, and it's like, oh, that's cute. But in the new one, it seems like for the first 10 to 15 minutes, he is constantly talking to the narrator and constantly like looking at words or touching words or falling down sentences. He's like, I wish that paragraph was a little longer. And I feel like they did too much of that.
Yeah, like it was really interesting seeing that in the 77 version, because you didn't see a whole lot of fourth wall breaking like that in in a lot of media, like, which I'm sure that was actually the case in the original book as well, that they directly addressed the fact that they're in a book.
I actually don't think they did.
It wasn't? Oh, okay, that's interesting.
I don't think so.
Oh.
There's constant fourth wall breaking in that the story will break and then it'll be Christopher Robin talking to his father.
Okay.
But he doesn't usually talk directly to the characters in the story. But I guess that's probably where they got it from.
Probably.
Or got the idea from.
That would make sense. But yeah, I did notice that as well. Like, they did it kind of subtly, and there were a couple moments where even the fourth wall breaking like resolved situations, like when Tigger was in the tree and they just turned the book sideways so he could walk down the paragraph.
Right, that's sort of the ultimate of the joke, because at that point they really are breaking.
Yeah, like they straight up like defy physics at that point to just kind of mess around with it a little so they could have a resolution to the story, whereas they kind of just do it willy-nilly in the newer one. Like, it just, like, Pooh gets woken up by the narrator flipping the book around.
Right. And that's like one of the first things that happens, which was the sign of, oh no, is this going to be a constant thing? They eventually let up on it, which I was happy about, but I mean...
But it does still come into a lot. Like, how they get out of the pit in the end is by, climbing up a staircase of letters.
Exactly. The book saves them. I would have liked it if there was something else. I don't know what else they would have done, but something else to have gotten them out of the hole.
Right.
But I don't know. That feels... I can't even say if it feels lazy or not, because they really did, in the middle of the story, they stopped using the narrator and the letters, I feel. They just...
Yeah, it kind of, like, they had John Cleese as the narrator, and then it just, all of a sudden, it's just kind of, like, gone.
Yeah, he's gone, and then shows up again near the end, and that's...
It's pretty much that.
Right.
So... Well, win some, you lose some with that trope. It's like, cool ideas live and die on a specific trope. That's why the first one was so interesting, and this one was like, eh.
Right. Even if they had just done it a little bit to be there, the fact that they opened on it and they harped on it for so long felt like it was supposed to be a nudge to the audience, like, well, yeah, this is how Winnie the Pooh is. He's always interacted with the narrator, so we're going to do that too. Instead of just letting it happen naturally.
Mm-hmm.
Their storytelling, they introduce Pooh, or they introduce like all the characters basically through that same method almost.
Yeah. I gotcha.
It's more of a slight nitpick over anything else, really.
Oh yeah. Which I know. Like, with the quality of both these movies, it does come down to nitpicking. Right. Or just general feel. And, you know, I think we've been pretty obvious on which one we prefer.
Yeah, if I'm gonna be honest, yeah. And
Like, it's pretty common that we do come to quite a consensus like that. But yeah, there's just certain moments, especially with classics like this, it's hard to argue.
it really is. And there's another thing I wanted to bring up, and I want to know your thoughts on this because I can't tell if I'm just being nostalgia blind or not.
Mm.
And that's the songs that they have, the musical numbers throughout.
Mm.
In the 77, the Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh, whatever you want to call it. In that one, they have songs, but they're just small ditties. They're like hums, which sort of mirrors the book because the book has like a ton of songs in it, where it's just like, and as Pooh was walking to Rabbit's house, he sang a song to himself, and there's like two stanzas of things Pooh made up that he's singing about.
Yeah.
So the original one has these little ditties that he sings or that Tigger sings, and the story is still happening while they're singing. It's like moving the plot forward, even if it's not intentionally doing so. Whereas it feels
Right.
they try to make the new one more of a musical by making the songs musical numbers that don't necessarily move forward the plot. They're just there because they're songs.
Yeah, I definitely did get that feel. That's not just you. And like, that does kind of come back to moments of nothingness, moments of kind of downtime, where it really does feel like a real situation. Like, how often have you had to go walk to someplace or you're waiting on someone and you just come up with a little ditty in your head that you just kind of hum to yourself, and you know, versus this one or versus the 2011 just kind of taking that up to a level that it didn't really need to be, and kind of losing its effect as a result.
Right. I think if I'm thinking back on it, the I think the only song that really did kind of move the plot forward is the Tigger 2 song.
Yeah,
C-
even that's debatable.
it is. It cuz by that merit you can say that the Baxon song also kind of moves the plot forward. I guess it probably does more so because it establishes a reason for them all to be doing this plan that Rabbit set forth.
Yeah,
Um so I guess that one probably does more so, but since the Tigger 2 one is so much more kinematic, I felt like it moved a lot more, but it really doesn't, does it? It doesn't establish anything other than Tigger's got this disguise now, and Eeyore has an anchor.
yeah. It kind of sets up a couple points later, but otherwise it's kind of its own deal.
Right. And don't get me wrong, like that 3D animation stuff in the honey segment where he's dancing around in that world made of honey, it looks beautiful, but it
Yeah.
literally halts the story for like 3 minutes.
Oh yeah, it stops it dead.
Yeah, there's usually musicals use songs for progression, but that is just Pooh dancing with honey
Yep.
to, I guess,
So
to show off visual effects, which isn't inherently a bad thing, but for the purposes of plot, it definitely is.
yeah, yeah. Like, it was pretty, and I can hardly fault that. But yeah, it stopped everything dead, and it didn't really need to be drawn out as much as it was.
Right.
So, which can be kind of summed up, the movie as a whole. In a lot of ways, it's like it kind of dragged a lot of stuff that didn't need to be dragged.
Right.
So
The one instance where it dragged, but I honestly didn't mind, it all goes back to humor and sort of that miscommunication thing, is when Rabbit is trying to communicate with Piglet when they're all trapped in the hole and Piglet's trying to rescue them or get them out of there.
yeah, like the nodding scene.
Yeah, that whole thing goes on for 2 minutes and
Still funny.
exactly, which okay, I want your thoughts on this. I haven't really thought about it until not too terribly long ago. What establishes that as being funny to you
Um,
compared to the new Ghostbusters when they're talking about letting the cat out of the bag? I want you to tell me this, and then I'll reflect on it.
wordplay. I think it's a creative use of wordplay, that it's kind of meant to be like a mental, like kind of a brain teaser sort of thing. If you can follow them what they're saying, or you're following how this character isn't following, and so it's interesting to see how these miscommunication things can come up. It's who's on first, what's on second in cartoon form.
Okay.
Versus
I'm glad.
Ghostbusters, it's just them repeating the same phrase in kind of a roundabout manner to kind of try and explain a phrase. It's the difference between telling a clever joke and trying to explain a not so clever joke.
Okay.
And so it's like, I understand. It's like, it's funny if someone's never heard the phrase, the cat's out of the bag, and you have to phrase it, or you have to explain it in different ways. But it's not that funny whenever it's two characters breaking it down for the sake of, just confusion and dragging out a scene. Versus Winnie the Pooh, it's playing around with the idea of homonyms and that sort of thing. So it's like, oh, okay, this is funny.
Okay. Yeah, I do agree with you.
It's all about cleverness.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm glad you brought up the who's on first thing, because that was my thought on it. Was it's a very Abbott and Costello-esque routine.
Yep.
Which happens quite a lot. Like, that's also a trope in a lot of comedy, especially cartoons, is someone saying a word and someone else saying bless you or gesundheit because they think because it sounds like a sneeze.
That also happens in this film.
Exactly. It's sort of a trope, but I don't know, it can still be
you,
funny.
Not at you. Which I actually thought that one was really funny.
Right. And that's that sort of happens that happens a second time at the bottom of the hole as well with Pooh and Rabbit, because he says not, and Pooh says who's there. They
So yeah,
it's not just one layer. They're not just getting two versions of not confused. Pooh also gets it confused with something else. And now there's 3 different versions of what everyone's talking about floating around.
Mm-hmm. And then it's, the idea of like, I can't tie a knot, but I can tie a bow. It's like, so it is a lot of fun. So yeah, that's the distinct difference in my mind.
Piglet's very clever, and he brings up a flower, and he's like, "See,
it's very pretty."
It's a very
I just
pretty
realized
flower,
he ends up tying the ropes into the shape of a flower at the end.
Oh my god, he does do that.
He brings it all the way back around. Oh my god, that's a really good bit. Okay,
that is. I love that.
It's very clever. So that's kind of that whole scene's quite the saving grace for the film.
Right, and they cap off that whole scene with Owl flying out of the hole to like push Piglet forward, and then he flies back down there.
And nobody realizes it. It's like, oh,
right. That was a really good speech.
Yeah, I can't believe how good that speech was.
Right, and that's a trope too that it's hard to explain, because that's something that usually gets me mad in comedies. Whenever someone's like, that was incredible, speaking really slowly to build up one thing, and then they completely turn it around. Mm-hmm. But I accepted it in this instance, and I guess it's because it was a lot quicker. It wasn't as slow, which is really hard for me to describe, and it can kind of make me look like a hypocrite too, because I think it's a matter of like 0.5 seconds with how long Rabbit pauses, but I think it works in this instance, and it doesn't work in a lot of other instances.
Yeah, I feel you.
It's something that's really hard for me to explain, but that's the best I can explain it.
Mm-hmm. I guess it's kind of I guess kind of all those things put together kind of sums up the 2011 one pretty well. It's got a lot of tropes, and it does some of them well.
Right.
So,
And the ones that it doesn't do well, it's blaringly obvious, unfortunately.
Yeah, like having musical numbers.
Right. It's not something that can be swept under the rug as just a cliche that you won't think about unless you're thinking about it. They're things that you can see from face value, like, oh, well, okay, that's a very movie thing of you to do, which at times can be unfair of a movie, but when you're comparing something as great as The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh to this, it just makes it more obvious, and maybe that's unfair, maybe it's not. I think it's good in its own right, but like you said earlier, I think it's obvious which of the two we prefer, and that's the very nature of comparing film to one another, is that some things are going to stand out and others aren't.
I think so.
So is that good consensus? Do we have that?
Yeah, I'd say so. The new one is, full of its own little tropes, and it does them cleverly. But it's just it can't be just the simplicity and joy that is the original. It's such a staple, like you said, throughout so many people's lives that it's hard to fault it.
That's true. Yeah, it really is a staple, and
Hmm.
and that is good enough in and of its own. Just because if something can be held as a staple outside of nostalgic value, like people can watch that today, kids can watch that today who have never seen it before, and they can enjoy it just as much. I'm sure it's definitely easier to for a kid to watch an old cartoon and appreciate it compared to like a black and white movie.
Hmm.
So it has that going for it. But
Yeah.
just as a film itself too, if you're not looking at the company that produced it and the character that it has, the entire lore and franchise that it has spawned, it's just a good film too.
Yeah, I gotta agree. It's a hard thing to beat when it's just a good film overall, and then the new one just kind of tries to recapture a lot of limelight. So it just can't quite live up to.
Right. To sort of end this off, we usually end by trying to pick our favorite shots or favorite scenes of the movie. I can't really think of any in particular. We already talked about good visuals or good animatics, but
Yeah.
I kind of want to know, what was your favorite joke or bit of jokey dialogue from the original? Because we both covered a lot of humorous lines from the 2011 version, but we didn't do a lot of the 1977 version. So, what's your favorite joke?
Uh, I think it had to do. I think it was during the flood where Eeyore was floating down the river and he saw a house for Owl and he's like, "Well, that one looks nice, nice size, looks pretty sturdy," and then it sinks underwater. It's like a little wet though.
That
It's
is
like
good. That's
I
very good.
do love that one. It's just a nice little chuckle one. It's like
Right.
where it's like there's this whole entire little house that's just beautiful, but just kind of sinks away. And of course, Eeyore of all people, in the middle of this giant flood, is still dutifully going about finding a house.
Right.
And he just so happens to be floating by this one where he's like, well, he gives a genuine assessment of it, regardless of the current situation he's in.
Everyone else has given up, but he's still persevering.
Yeah, everyone else is like, "Oh my God, it's flooding," and Eeyore's just like, "Yeah."
Uh huh.
So yeah, pretty much just anything with Eeyore in it, I'm just like, "Yeah, okay, I'm a fan."
It's true.
So yeah, you got one?
Um. Actually, yeah, I hadn't really thought about it, but there is one that I did laugh. Usually, I can tell what my favorite line is if I have to pause it, which I've discussed before.
Yeah.
If I have to pause it because I'm laughing and not paying attention, and that's when Pooh and Piglet are in Owl's house during the very windy day, and it's blowing
Mhm.
everything around. The wind blows so hard that it topples the entire house and it crumbles, and they just climb from the ashes. And Owl looks at Pooh and he goes, "Did you do that?" And Pooh's
Yeah.
like, "I don't think so." One,
Yeah,
just
that's
the
a pretty good one.
gall of assuming that Pooh destroyed his entire house, but then Pooh being like, he doesn't remember if he did it or not.
I'm gonna try to continue a trend going that I started in the last one and give a recommendation of a movie, in replacement of the one we found to be the lesser movie this week.
Good idea. I'm,
And
I'm glad you're continuing with this
yeah,
idea.
and this one's a kind of an obvious one. It's the sequel to, like, the technical sequel to the '77 version, Christopher Robin. It's honestly, if you get a chance, go see it. It's great. It's really does continue on with a bit more of the original tone. It's not quite as frantic in a way as the newer one. Like this, it definitely does have frantic moments, but it's more just kind of out of excitement. And it's just the acting stellar all around, and it's just an interesting little romp. It's kind of a little fun little expansion on the original idea. So I love it a lot. Ewan McGregor's great in it. Obviously, Jim Cummings is hard to beat with his Tigger and Boo. So
Right?
yeah, that is a big high recommendation from me.
I agree with that.
But you want to get over the rundown on some of the social stuff?
Oh, sure. Okay, so I was debating whether to bring this up or not, but I might as well. We recently migrated the podcast from SoundCloud to Anchor, so we're now on Anchor.fm. That's where you can primarily listen to us if you want to use a web-based or app-based platform, because they do have an app that is very easy to use. It's actually easy for me to manage as well, because I can post episodes using the app and I can track statistics and everything. It's good for users and for, I guess, content providers. So that is Anchor.fm, and that's where we're located. You can still find us on various podcast sharing platforms: iTunes, Google Play. We should be on Stitcher. I have to recheck that. Podomatic, places like that. And we're constantly adding new ones. The website, which was alluded to last podcast, is actually live currently.
Hooray!
At theyremadeit.com. There are some design things I want to tweak with it, but everything is actually working and it's put together. I have links everywhere, links out the ass on that website. You can click on any word, you get a link to something.
Yeah.
Not really, that'd be terrible web design. And
just random Wikipedia articles.
Yeah, they all link back to Wikipedia articles of varying degree. Most of them to Alf, because I just love Alf. But and on Twitter, I'm still thinking of ways to use that outside of posting when new episodes are live. But if you still want to know what it is, it's at It Remade on Twitter. It still exists there. And just leave us a review, leave us a comment, send us an email at theyremadeit@gmail.com. There's plenty of ways to contact us, find our content.
As always, it helps out a lot, even if it's just enable to be like, here's what you're doing horribly, horribly wrong.
Oh, yes. Leave us anything positive. I think on the website, on the Contact Us page, I explicitly state, send us hate mail. I'll accept anything, and I'll read it. I don't mind.
Yeah. Makes our days brighter.
Right. Go ahead.
As always, I'm your host, Stuart.
And I'm your host, Jacob.
And this has been They Remade It. Have a good night.
He was unaware atop his chair while bailing he was sailing.
And the rain came down, 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 and the flood rose up, up, up.
Pooh was caught, and so he thought, I must rescue my supper.
10 honey pots he rescued, enough to see him through. But as he sopped up his supper, the river sopped up Pooh.